I hope everyone found that very useful. Maybe I'll ask colleagues now to switch their cameras back on. We've received a lot of questions there over the last hour or so. So we'll do our best to try and answer as many as possible of the questions that are there. And we'll work through those, and any questions that we don't get to, we'll try and download them and respond to them. That we'll upload a questions and answers session afterwards in terms of to try and make those, again, those common questions to try and clarify the issues that are arising in the main in terms of what's there. So Josephine Brennan will help me, I suppose, facilitate delivery of the questions to the team that's there, and hopefully we'll be able to get through as many as possible. I guess I'll make a start on some questions, and Josephine, you can follow through then with a few after that. So firstly, I've seen there's a couple of questions related to, I guess, the specifications on the low input grassland. Again, just to highlight, the specifications are there to be read. You know, it's important that planners do take time to read through all these. But one of the questions here is land drainage possible on low input grassland fields? And I guess you can bear that in mind with the low input peat grassland as well. So maybe Aileen or Pat, do you want to take that?
Yeah, maybe I'll give Aileen a break there for a sec. Yeah, so there's no restriction on draining in a league parcel, okay, or low input peat grassland. But by draining a parcel, that might affect the score. But I suppose that answer is on condition that if the parcel is a Natura parcel, you know, there's obviously conditionality and baseline rules regarding Natura, and it's as long as you're complying with all baseline regarding EIAs as well and any baseline requirements. So, but there, I suppose, LIG and low input peat grassland, the results based. So that means we don't say you must do something, you can't do something. I suppose, but what you do could affect the score you achieve in the parcel.
Thanks, Pat. A couple of questions also coming in there. Maybe Pat, you take this as well in relation to the splitting of parcels. And there's one here in relation to a farm that has land within the waded bird layer, and they're wondering, can they split the field because the waded bird layer doesn't extend to the entire field? So they'll be planting trees on, I guess, a field that's outside of that boundary.
Yeah, no, GLAM has blocked tree planting in all parcels that intersect the breeding waded layer. So splitting the parcel will not help that in that regard. And the reason we block tree planting is planting of trees and planting of hedgerows could be detrimental to breeding waders. So it's part of the farm sustainability plan and preventing actions that could cause damage. So that's why tree planting and hedgerow planting are blocked in any parcel that intersects the breeding waded layer.
Thanks, Pat. Also related to the league extensive grasses, what's the payable area? Like farmers presently have, I guess, the max eligible area. Next year's system is moving to eligible hectare. So what's eligible for the farmer?
Yeah, so I suppose, yeah. So basically, first of all, to select an action this year, there has to be an MEA of greater than 0 in the parcel, with the exception of barn owl nest boxes, which can be selected in any parcel, even if there's a 0 MEA. So all other actions can only be chosen in parcels where the MEA is greater than 0. And in next year's BIS application, then that's where you make the farmer makes the claim or payment for the area-based actions. So it will be the lower of the claimed area and the eligible hectare in the BIS application next year will be the payable area. So one of the questions was, okay, what if the MEA of the parcel is maybe 8 hectares in BPS this year, and because of the change in eligibility rules, that goes to 9 hectares next year under BIS. So if the eligible hectare is 9 hectares and the farmer claims 9 hectares, then they will be paid on 9 hectares.
Thanks, Pat. There's also a couple of questions maybe Mark could answer in relation to advisors becoming acres advisors. And maybe, Mark, I know we sent out a circular there yesterday or the day before, so maybe you just want to walk people through just the final items that people should be watching on that, please.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, I see a number of questions about access. We have contacted all advisors, and we have most advisors set up at this stage. So I suppose the first thing, if you're not set up and you don't have access to the systems at this point, the chances are that there's something outstanding in the FOSS site in Portlaoise. That's the Farm Advisory Service. We did send out, as John said, a reminder circular yesterday to update everybody and just to remind of what is the criteria. And the first thing is you must be FOSS approved. You must have completed the acres training. You must have access codes. So all advisors would have an AGT, an AGR code, and an AGY for their agency. If you don't have that, you need to talk to online services within the department. And remember, that's online services for all department schemes, not just for acres. You must have registered your interest. We did ask advisors to notify us and to register their interest, and there was a short form. It went out yesterday as well for anybody who hasn't finished it or hasn't submitted it. And you must create the online links between yourself and your clients so that you can act on their behalf. And again, there's a reference point there, online services on our website. We'll guide you through that if you're a new advisor and if you haven't done that process. And it can be done through a paper form, or more efficiently, it can be done through a text messaging service between you and your client. You submit your request to create the link and your client confirms. So I suppose the key thing is if you don't have access, look at your FOSS clearance. Are you fully cleared by our Farmer Advisory Service? If there's anything outstanding there, you won't have access to our systems. If you feel that you have all that and there's still something outstanding, drop us an email to acres@agriculture.gov.ie. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And again, like Mark is referring to, again, we have provided all this material on the website, and we will be providing this webinar will be available afterwards to look at again in terms of being available on the website. So that's useful. Maybe Josephine, will I pass over to you for a couple of questions there to pick off the system at the moment? Or Ivan.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. Hi, everybody. There's a lot of questions after coming in. I see that there's some questions relating to partnerships. So, Dimna, I might ask you just maybe to walk us through the rules surrounding partnerships. There's a specific question there. If you can form a partnership after, or say midstream in acres. So if you're in year 2, and how many contracts can you have? Acres contracts if you have 2 or 3 herds in a partnership. So maybe just the rules around it.
Thanks, Josephine. As I said before, then there's a number of provisions in the terms and conditions, and farm partnerships are also covered there. They are in section 10 of the terms and conditions. As regards if an applicant is approved for acres and during the contract decides to lease the farm, this is one I just spotted before that. If an applicant is approved for acres and during the contract decides to lease the land, can the acres contract be transferred to this farmer's herd number? So the relevant provision there is 14.5, and contracts are non-transferable except in the case of certified serious illness. The transfer of the entire acres contract area is subject to prior approval of the acres section within the department. And the other one is death of the participant. So as regards approved into acres and during the contract decides to lease the land, can the acres contract be transferred? They would have to need to apply for approval in advance. But I just have to say that the contract cannot be split, and as well as that, a person may only have one contract, so they can't transfer to a person who already has a contract. As regards forming a partnership 2 years into acres, So the acres contract is approved. 14.6 says the acres contract is approved in the name of the applicant farmer, and any change to the name of the farmer or legal status which transfers control of the holding to a new entity, that requires prior approval from the acres section within the department again. And so you need to apply for a transfer in advance, and that they can apply for a transfer into a partnership, but once again with prior approval. And another point is that you need to ensure that the BIS is in the same name as their acres contract. So the business ID is a key determinant in that. My colleague Mark Crosby may be able to deal further with that. Sorry, Josephine, there was 2 other questions there. Maybe I will just deal with them when I see them. There was about, if a client has a native woodland or agroforestry, but the scheme premiums have run out, is he/she still eligible for Tier 2 access to the scheme? Well, the determinant there is that they are a participant in those schemes, and to be a participant, we're considering that to be still in receipt of premiums. But as far as I know, agroforestry was 5 years, so I'm not sure how long they are receiving premiums or when they commence their agroforestry, but basically they still need to be in receipt of premiums. And then the other, if an area is planted in trees after acres completed, can this area be put back into grassland? Well, as I said, the forests and trees planted under this scheme are afforded protection by the Forestry Act 2014, which controls the felling of trees. So a felling licence may be required to fell or otherwise remove trees that have been planted. So under the Forestry Act, there are certain situations where felling of a tree is exempted, but any farmer or landowner wishing to fell or otherwise remove trees are advised to contact the Forestry Division of this department to ensure that they comply with the tree felling requirements of the Forestry Act 2014. Perhaps, Mark, do you want to deal with those questions about the business ID?
Yeah, well, just what you said there, your business ID, so your BPS must be in the same business ID as your farm partnership, sorry, as your acres application. So if it is a partnership and you had a 2021 BPS for the partnership, well, your acres application needs to be made with the same partnership reference number. Now, there is one question there. If I'm in a partnership, can I make an application myself outside and in my own herd? And again, that gets back to the compatibility between the BPS application in 2021 and the current partnership. I saw another question there about what can I qualify for within the partnership, and does the multiplier effect. The department's partnership section sets a multiplier, which means that if if you have 3 holdings, your maximum payment can be multiplied by 3 depending on the actions that you bring in. So a partnership of 3 can get 21,000, a partnership of 2, 14,000, subject to whatever you apply for and what actions you apply for. So I think that covers most of the partnership questions.
Okay, thanks, Dipna. Thanks, Mark. There are a few questions there around the ranking and selection. Maybe Pat, would you be able to give a quick summary of just, I suppose, the high level detail of the ranking and selection? And there's another question in relation to the ranking and selection for the CP areas. Just when will it be available?
Yeah, first of all, the ranking and selection for the CP areas will be available when the terms and conditions are finalised and put up on the website. So we hope that'll be in the next few days. But again, I can't give a final date for that. Ranking and selection for the general scheme is up there on the website in a minute in the draft terms and conditions now. I don't have it to share, but like essentially it'll set out Tier 1 applicants get in first, then Tier 2, and then Tier 3. And the last section C of the ranking and selection will separate any one of those tiers where it's oversubscribed. So if in a scenario all the Tier 1 people are accepted because there's enough space, and then only some of the Tier 2 people will get into the scheme, then it's the section C. It's the marks that are attained under section C will dictate which Tier 2 applicants get into the scheme. And similarly in tier 3, if all tier 1 and tier 2 get in, it's the section C then will divide up and dictate which applicants get in under tier 3.
Okay, thanks, Pat. There's another question there, maybe Anne or John Carty. You might be able to give an answer on it. It's about the CP application, just to explain the process. There's also another one in terms of CP, just asking about the MPIs and the landscape actions, if say the payment rates would be similar to the general actions.
Yeah, maybe Josephine, I can take the second one there.
Okay.
So there is a number of NPIs that would be very similar to general actions. Examples would be planting of new hedgerow rejuvenation, planting of trees, and a few more. So we haven't finalized the costing for those NPIs yet. So the difference between a general action and an NPI, I suppose, is that the general actions are paid over 5 years. So the cost is spread out over 5 years and you get a payment for each year. Whereas the NPIs, it'll be a one-off payment. So by its nature, it'll be a much bigger payment because you're getting it. It's one payment for 1 year. So, and the payment rates may even be, again, slightly higher because there's a higher transaction cost in that, I suppose, the advisor has to go out each year and select these NPIs. So there would be an allowance for an additional transaction cost as well. As regards to the application process, then, I mean, it's the same for a general applicant as a CP applicant. The farm sustainability plan has to be completed. If there's no general actions to be selected, then it's a case of you press submit in the farm sustainability plan. You submit the plan even though there's no general action selected, and you go into the next screen then where you abide by the terms and conditions and upload any documents that are relevant and submit your application.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Maybe John, I'll hand back to you if you have spotted any more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Josephine. Yeah, I see a couple of questions coming in again on riparian zones and the use of PIP maps. You know, is it when you're targeting the riparian zones, do you have to follow the PIP map, the priority flow paths that are identified on PIP? Maybe Aileen, you could elaborate.
Your sound just broke up there for a second. Is it what a?
Yeah, it's the targeting. Like when you're selecting a riparian zone, do you have to follow the PIP maps to target where you're putting it in terms of the PIP flow paths?
No, look, I suppose they're best, you know, they are best targeted to these high risks area first, because this is where they're going to have more impact and will protect water courses more where there are in these high risk flow paths. But it's not mandatory, because you know it has to suit the farm as well, depending on their layouts. So it's not mandatory that they are selected, but look, we have outlined in the spec that where possible that they should be targeted to these areas first. There's just a couple more questions just in relation to water courses there. There's one question there, lakes, do they have to be fenced off to 1.5 if it's in low input peat grassland or extensively grazed? So like within those, the layer that we refer to, the OSI waterline and single streamline, does not take in lakes. So the answer is that they wouldn't have to be. But also, does the lake boundary qualify for a fenced riparian margin? And they would qualify. You know, you can put the riparian margin on there. You'll see that the lakes actually only show up on GLAM when you turn on the OSI polygon. It makes a polygon area around the lake. So it's not mandatory then under the area-based actions to fence those off. Just one more then on water courses. a question has come in that if a farmer is in derogation and all grassland, can he choose a riparian buffer strip grassland at 1.5 metre, or does he have to choose a 3 metre strip and only get paid for 1.5? So we've outlined that it's in addition to any mandatory requirements. So if they are in derogation, then those applicable watercourses, you know, they have to be fenced off the 1.5. So they can apply for a 3 metre strip, but it would have to be in addition to the 1.5 that's required there as a baseline, or they can apply for a 1.5. But there would have to be a 3 metre buffer there, so 1.5 for the mandatory and then additional 1.5 then for acres.
Yeah, thanks, Aileen. There a further question on geese and swans. There's a farm, it has 40 hectares of land within the geese and swans layer. They'll select the geese and swans action, which is, I think, half of that. Can they put other actions on the balance of the geese and swans mapped area?
Yeah, so the answer to that one, so the answer is yes, they can split the parcel and they could put 19 hectares into geese and swans action, and because they have 19 hectares, that'll satisfy the geese and swans action, and remaining actions then can be chosen in the remainder of the parcel, the other split parcel.
Okay, another one here of a farm where it's a small farm, 35 hectares. All of it is designated Natura for wader birds. So what actions does that farm pick? I guess there's a perception here that they can't pick any action. But again, I think there is options there that are suitable for that. Pat, if you could.
Yeah, there's a number of actions they could pick in a Natura parcel. There are certain actions that would be blocked in the Natura layer, such as riparian buffers and tree planting. So anything that would require consent, prior consent, would not be allowed in the Natura area. But they could pick low input grassland, they could pick extensively grazed pasture. There's a number of other actions which would be allowed in Natura. So they would be set out in the, so within the requirements for each action, it will state whether it's allowed on Natura or not.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Maybe John or Anne could clarify the compatibility or complementarity between the organic scheme and the CP area. Like, what could a farmer do? There's a sense by the question here that if the farmer is in the CP area and they want to join organics, they're significantly disadvantaged. John, if not Pat. I guess the question here is, it's really around the idea that the farm is only getting payment for scores that are 8, 9, 10, whereas there's a lot of margin actions they could select if they were just a general acres applicant to booster up their organics payment.
Yeah, well, organics and you know, the new payment structures are quite attractive, and in many cases, you know, farmers are choosing either or. They're comparing, contrasting with their advisors the attractiveness of both schemes. But I suppose from our point of view, the way that our payment structure is designed is that we've reduced our payment area for the land-based actions, area-based actions are based on reduced input, and which leads to reduced output, and the organic payments are structured in the exact same way. So that's why we had to sit down and see where our payment rates were compatible with the organic sections. We do have in the appendix to the spec set out clearly, because a lot of queries have come in over the last month on the compatibility of organic farming scheme and acres. So we have set it out in appendix 6. We've gone through each specific actions, a full page of issues, and I've referred advisors back to that, because a lot of them are generally broken down into specific action-based queries. So, John, on balance, I think advisors should look at appendix 6 and go through each specific action and see where the payment rates are compatible or not.
Thanks, John.
Just maybe to add, John, there, so maybe the question was specifically for the CP, John, was it?
Yeah, specifically.
Yes. Yeah, so for the CP applicants, in the results, in the CP parcels, the forage parcels, so yeah, they will only get the top up for the 8, 9 and 10. But if those farmers don't reach €7,000 from results-based payments, which they're unlikely to do because they're only getting that top up, they will be able to avail of additional non-productive investments to make up that shortfall. So if they were only getting €2,000 from the results-based payment, okay, they haven't got to 7, so there's €5,000 additional funding available there for non-productive investments. And they can choose non-productive investments like your tree planting, hedgerow rejuvenation, or other ones that might be applicable on the farm. So I suppose every farmer will have the ability to max out their payment. But it's just that organic farmers are already getting paid for, as John stated, for reducing their outputs. Therefore, we can only pay for those high scores and a top-up payment.
Yeah, but there is options there through NPIs to bring them up towards the 7,000 if they choose to take on that.
Exactly, yeah. So it's additional funding they can avail of through NPIs, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess maybe, Pat, when you're speaking about the ring fencing, there's quite a number of questions coming up around ring fencing and just clarifying, I guess, how it works, the score level, and I guess what happens if the score is less when they do the actual report, the actual score next summer.
Yeah, so I suppose very similar to the organic farmers. So it's ring fenced at an equivalent, the equivalent rate for a score of 8. So if next summer the land only scores a 5 or a 6 and they don't reach that €7,000 limit, they can take on additional non-productive investments to bridge that gap up to the 7,000. So if the ring fencing rule states there's no money available for general actions, there is no point in picking general actions other than rare breeds. So conservation of rare breeds is the one exception, okay? But if the ring fencing rule says there's no money available for other general actions, there is no point in selecting them because they will not be paid regardless of the score next summer. But farmers will have the opportunity to take on additional non-productive investments to bridge the gap. There was another question there, John, as well. So maybe a farmer who had a rented parcel in 2021, which is in the CP zone, and you're saying, now 2022, that parcel is no longer farmed by the farmer, but yet the computer is saying he's a CP applicant. And yes, that is the case. So the CP stream checker was based on 2021. So that farmer can only apply for the acres cooperation, even if that rented parcel wasn't farmed in 22. But the ring fencing rule only applies to owned forage parcels within the CP area. Okay, it applies to all commonage whether owned, leased or rented, but it's just the owned forage parcels within the CP area. So because that farmer now has lost that rented CP forage parcel in 22, as long as they've no commonage, then the ring fencing rule will state there's €7,000 available for general actions. So that farmer is still in the CP scheme. They can apply for up to €7,000 of general actions, and they also have the additional option of applying for non-productive investments up to the value of 10,500.
Even though they have no farm.
Yeah, even on the outside parcels, but they will have to be screened, and there will have to be justification for getting paid for those non-productive investments. But if there was a non-productive investment applied for that was addressing a water quality issue, like a riparian buffer strip on an outside parcel, and if that wasn't causing damage to any conservation target, well, then that would more likely be approved. So that farmer has the benefit of that additional funding available to them. So like some people are saying, why can't they apply into the general scheme? But they're still better off to be in the cooperation scheme because they can have general actions up to €7,000 plus another option of 3,500 of NPIs.
Okay, thanks. And Aidan, I see a couple of questions there coming in on Commonage, and they're partly the same. So they have Commonage in 22, but it wasn't there in 2021. What happens?
Yeah, so on the Commonage side of things, I suppose if it's there in 2022's BPS, it's mandatory that it comes into the acre scheme. It will be paid on as in the Commonage action in the acre scheme. The only difference is if it wasn't declared under 2021 BPS, it won't achieve them tier 1. It won't be counted for the tier 1 access. So they needed greater than 0.5 of a hectare and declared in 2021 and continue to declare that in 2022 to get tier 1 access. I suppose just a couple more, just John, maybe just on the Commonage side of things, I suppose just a couple of questions there on who scores the Commonages, and I suppose the Commonage are going to be treated. The Commonages greater than 10 hectares will be all scored by the CP teams. So the CP teams are assigned out the Commonage LIPIS data at the minute, and I suppose they will assess that data and they will decide then what parcels are to be back to us, we'll say, that are regarded as less than 10 hectares. So there will be some LIPIS parcels there that are physically less than 10 hectares, but they may be running contiguous to the larger Commonage area beside it, and those parcels will be scored along with the by the CP teams if that's what's decided by them. So the process there will be that the CP teams will decide what parcels are regarded as being less than 10 hectares, and they will nominate those back to the farm advisor to prepare a Commonage farm plan for. And the date for submission of that Commonage farm plan has to be decided yet, but we're hoping that it could be tied in along with the assessment in the summer of 2023. So just another couple, I suppose that covers the less than the 10 hectares, and the Commonage is less than 10 hectares. That would be split into two 7-hectare parcels. That covers that too. So basically those 2 7-hectare parcels, all that LIPIS data has been given to the CP teams, and they will decide whether those 7-hectare parcels are being scored by themselves or put back to the farm advisor for a Commonage farm plan. So question there just on how will the non-CP Commonages be treated. That's, as I said, all Commonages, regardless whether they're CP or non-CP, will be scored by the CP teams and will go through the same process. And just one on the minimum YO or the minimum stocking rate for the Commonage. I suppose there is a minimum stocking rate of YO equivalents required on the Commonage. So that will be taken, that initial minimum will be taken as the minimum that was established under the GLAS requirements under the Commonage Management Plan process and under GLAS. And that will be subject to review following the assessment of the Commonages by the CP teams. They will have the provision there to revise those minimum figures. So that's just a few on the Commonage, John.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. There, I see a couple of questions just related to geotag photographs are needed for a couple of the, I suppose, the parcel-based actions. So again, are geotag photographs expected now, or is it later? Just to again clarify when precisely they're needed.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that one. So yeah, there's 4 actions that it states a geotag photo has to be taken in the parcel where the action has been selected. So it's part of the farm sustainability plan process is the advisor is supposed to walk the farm, walk the parcels before the actions are chosen. So it's when the advisor is walking the farm now, or has done the last couple of months, they should have taken the photos, submitted them via Agri-Snap. Okay, so if an advisor doesn't take a photo, a geotag photo in the required parcel, and chances his or her harm and submits a farm sustainability plan and application, what will happen is there's going to be a validation check done once the closing date of the scheme, once the scheme has closed. So we have a number of validation checks that are run on the various actions. So what will happen is a validation check will fail. It'll say no geotag photo submitted, therefore the action is ineligible. So if there was no geotag photo sent in for LIG, for example, LIG would be deemed invalid as an action and it won't be approved. And if league was the action that that farmer was relying on to get tier 1 because it was chosen an insurer parcel, well then they will not get tier 1 access because the league action was deemed ineligible. So I must stress it's vitally important that this is complied with and that the geotagged photos are taken properly as outlined in the specification on how best to take geotagged photos and are submitted. And if they're not, I suppose the actions would be deemed ineligible.
Okay, thanks, Pat. I see a couple of questions related to fences and how many are needed. So, for example, a farm selecting new hedge planting and putting up a riparian margin along one side, how many fences are needed? Aileen or Pat, maybe?
Yeah, just the question is, yeah, so it was for every action that requires a permanent fence, there should be a permanent fence for that action. So yeah, the question is put to us at the advisor training, for example, if somebody wanted to plant trees and decided to plant a new hedge as well and plant a new hedge outside the trees, will one fence suffice for both? And the answer is no. You must put a fence up to protect the trees. And if you want to put the hedge outside that's fine. You put another fence up to protect the hedge, because all these actions are costed and paid for based on the cost of putting up a permanent fence. So I suppose we have to justify to EU auditors that we're paying on how we're paying for these actions. So the specifications Aileen went through there's a number of actions that where we have costed a permanent fence. So they're listed in the spec. So each one of those actions needs a fence in its own right. And a fence that's used for fencing a riparian zone, or sorry, riparian strip, or a new hedge cannot be used in if a parcel is split, just to delineate split parcels as well. So Aileen went through that in her presentation and it's set out clearly in the specifications.
Okay, thanks, Pat. So I guess the key point here is parcels need to be, or when you're selecting actions, you need to select them in such a manner that they allow for that the provision of a fence to be done independently. We don't expect to be going out. We don't want, or shouldn't be going out to be seeing two fences side by side type of thing. Another question maybe for you, Aileen. Can you remove the toppings from a riparian zone?
Yeah, like it's not mandatory to do it every year, and it is down the additional guidance that you know, there are certain some of these riparian zones like where there is a lot of nutrients going in there with overland flows. So particularly in those targeted ones, it is it would be important to cut and remove the vegetation annually. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Not mandatory. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just pass it back there to Josephine. Maybe you have a few questions there to pick out.
Yeah, there are a few questions on soil sampling. So maybe Pat, could you just explain, I suppose, the difference maybe with acres in terms of nutrient management planning and soil samples? And if you have over 40 hectares, what does that mean in terms of your soil sampling?
Yeah, so there's no requirement for nutrient management plan in acres, but there is a soil sampling requirement. And the rules are set out in the specification. There's also an appendix at the back dealing with soil sampling. But in short, the maximum size for any soil sample is 5 hectares. And in the first 40 hectares of your farm, you have to have at least one sample for every 5 hectares. So if a farmer had 60 hectares, as an example, on his farm, if he took 8 soil samples that were exactly 5 hectares in size, that would cover 40 hectares, and his requirements for acres is satisfied. He or she doesn't have to take any additional samples. So 8 samples would suffice. But if the sample size was only 3 hectares, or say, for example, 4 hectares, so if each sample size was 4 hectares, they would need 10 samples to cover 40 hectares. And once they sample the 40 hectares with the 10 samples, each of 4 hectares each, that satisfies the requirement.
Okay.
I hope that's
Thanks.
clear.
Thanks, Pat. There are a few specific questions around some of the measures. So, for example, lig and extensively grazed, can you cut hay or silage off of these? So maybe Aileen or Pat, you can answer those.
Yeah, for extensively grazed pasture,
For
you
the
can.
extensively grazed, yeah, you can. Sorry, Pat, go on.
Aileen, yeah. No, go on.
Yeah, so the extensively grazed, you can cut silage. I seen there was another question then saying, does that qualify then for the €50 bonus, but not for the extensively grazed. It's the set rate, and you are allowed cut it after the 1st of July, I think. For the lig then, it's different, like it's results based. You can get the bonus if you're cutting it after the 1st of July for the €50 late meadow bonus. But, you know, I suppose cutting it earlier, it will affect maybe the species that are there for future and maybe lower score. So, you know, there's no prescription with the lig. It is results based.
Thanks, Aileen. There's another question there in relation to linear and area-based actions. Can you have both in the same parcel?
Yeah, well, I suppose.
I think is sorry, with the rotating actions, there's a few similar questions there that, you know, if they've picked the arable rotating actions like catch crop and min-till, and like they're blocked in the first year, and then they will be rotating them around the farm, and can they be rotated into parcels where there's arable margins or riparian margins? So they can, as long as there's, you know, as long as there's enough area to deliver the contract amount of the min-till or the catch crop, they can rotate them into the parcels that have those actions. I think that covers that one.
Thanks, Aileen. There's a question there on the CP side, just in relation to the local action plan, just a little bit more detail on it. Maybe John, could you give us an update on that?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of the CP structure, I suppose the reason behind it was to get, as explained earlier, was to try and get some coordination into these high value nature areas, or where most of our high value water and nature areas are. So we put together CP teams in each of the 8 zones, and I suppose their job is to manage and coordinate all the stakeholder involvement in this, and put together, in effect, a strategic plan for each of these areas. And over the next few months, you'll probably see in social media and local media that there are lots of local meetings being held in each of these areas now at the moment, inviting stakeholders, farmers, members of the public, etc., and advisors to come in and sit down and give their views on what they see as being the priorities for these areas over the next 5 years, and how to, I suppose, get farmers and everyone working together, because the nature and structure of the CP, the farm plans will be different to the ordinary general applicants, in that there'll be basic actions, but there'll also be non-productive investments and landscape actions, which will require farmers and other stakeholders cooperating to try and improve the quality of the environmental outputs from these areas on a large scale. So it will require people working together. So these CP teams have been recruiting staff, experts, with various different levels of expertise over the last few months. And they're going around meeting farmers, meeting members of the public, and it's their job to put together plans. We call them local area plans, and publish them, which set out, for example, the targets to be met. For example, in certain areas there, in the west, for example, there's huge problems with rhododendron and other invasive species that need to be tackled, and focus in of advisors and farmers in these areas need to tackle these areas. Other parts of the country have different environmental priorities, but in the new year we expect each of these 8 areas to have a local area plan to be published, which will set out annual targets to be met. And we would encourage all advisors, and it'll be necessary and I suppose important and a requirement for all advisors to work closely with the CP teams to try and, because it'll be your job to try and help implement these local area plans on an individual farm level. So for example, after meeting with the CP teams, their advice and guidance to you will be to, for example, pick certain parts of the country will need to a lot of farmers taking up certain non-productive investments or certain landscape actions. So the CP zones will be a big challenge of the next 5 years, and whatever advice are in those areas, you really need to develop and maintain an important relationship with the CP teams, because they are in charge of implementing the priorities, but it'll be a team effort between the advisors and farmers, and we'll be in the background to support the implementation of this. But it's a huge development and departure for the department, the way we're in effect launching 2 environmental schemes over the next 5 years, in effect splitting the upland, if you want, areas from the other general areas. But there's huge targets and responsibilities, I suppose, on Ireland to deliver and improve the spend and the money we're spending on environmental schemes, and the next 5 years will be challenging. But John, you may want to add something on the priorities in the local area plans.
Yeah. Well, I suppose overall the local area plans at the moment, the CP teams have been provided with all the various data layers from MPWS and Department of Housing in relation to water quality from the Water Framework Planning side. So at the moment they're working through the process of trying to identify, I guess, the priority conservation objectives for each of the 8 zones. And then they'll also be bringing down that priority targeting down to almost LIPA's level in terms of trying to help advisors target the right action in the right place. So you can imagine in some of these, there will be competing priorities on the same parcel that you can have both SPA and SAC on the one area. So they'll be guided by advice from MPWS in terms of how they prioritize or rank the priorities where there's competing issues within a zone. So this is a process that's going to take a period of time, but CP teams are working very fast at the moment in terms of developing these local area plans. A number of the CP teams have very intense, I suppose, local meeting agendas in terms of trying to reach out to farmers and farm advisors that are working in the specific areas as well to engage, because they are trying to mobilize, I guess, the same approach that was there in the EIPs in relation to a bottom-up engagement, trying to, I suppose, develop conservation targets and address the specific challenges that might be in individual local areas. So this is an area that will be developed further, and we'll be staying in close contact with Farm Advisory on this to try and, I guess, mobilize good progress in the area. Josephine, okay. Further questions there?
There's just one further question on geotagged photos. If you sent in a photograph for, say, wild bird cover, but then decided that you wanted to put that parcel in as LIG, and you've already sent in a photograph, what do you do there? Maybe Pat, you could answer that. If you changed your mind on what action was going to go in what parcel.
Yeah, so once the geotag photo has been taken in the parcel that is now being selected for the action, it will cover that action, even though it might have been identified as a LIG photo on the app, and now it's going to be winter bird food area based. That it's okay once the photo was taken in the correct parcel. Just as well, Josephine, there was a question come in there just on rotating actions. I might just answer it. So the question was, okay, if one of the rotational actions is selected in the application in a certain parcel, but maybe when the farmer is completing the BIS application next year, the cropping has changed and they want to rotate that action then next May when they're sending in their BIS application, can they do it in year one? And the answer is yes. Once they deliver the contracted area or the committed area, they can rotate it in year one in their BIS application.
Okay, thanks, Pat. There's a question there. Is header allowed on LIG, Pete? Maybe Pat or Aileen, you can answer that.
The question was, could you repeat that?
Is header allowed on LIG, Pete?
Well, in the league action, there's
So I don't think
3%.
like it's not. Yeah, it's not the. Yeah.
Go ahead, Aileen.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, there is no criteria for selection of the low input peat grassland. It's just the layer, you know, that they have to be within the layer on GLAM. It's the raised bog 500-meter buffer. So if the plot is falling within that, they can select the low input peat grassland on that. There's no criteria as outlined in the LIG that it has to have certain requirements. There's no criteria that way, and I guess the scorecard then will reward the wetland species that are in the low input peat grassland.
Okay, thanks, Aileen. John, I might hand back to you if you've spotted any more questions.
Could I just, there's a few quick hit questions there, if I could just run through one or two.
Work away, Mark. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, John. Thanks. Just again, a few more questions about advisor access, and I see one there where an advisor is saying they can't submit their expression of interest, and that's the step 1 expression of interest access agreement. Again, the circular we issued yesterday should cover that. That may mean that you didn't register as an acres advisor, so just have a look at that circular, and if there's any points of clarification, come back to us through the email. On partnerships, there's a question there. I formed a partnership in 2022, and will I be, can the partnership come into acres? The way that's going to work is that the 2 herds will be looked at from a 2021 point of view. So if one of those herds comes into the CP criteria for 2021, then the partnership is deemed to be eligible for the CP application stream. On organics, a question, I'm applying for organics this year for the first time, and will this make me eligible for tier 1 acres? It's not the organic scheme that we're referring to. You can be in the organic scheme, but the important thing is that you're a registered organic farmer. So you must be registered with one of the control bodies by the time acres tranche 1 closes to be considered for that tier 1 priority access. There's a similar question there about rare breeds. What is required? So at application stage, you must upload for your clients, and this will be available. You'll see this in our demo that we'll put up in the next day or 2 on the application process. So you need to upload the proof of membership for each of your clients at application stage. One more question on partnerships. If I'm in a partnership, can I transfer back to a herd? And again, I think Dimna covered that already, but it's subject, if you're making changes to your contract, you must contact us in acres and request that change. But I suppose the answer is yes, that is possible, subject to what you put in your request to us. But partnerships back to individual herd can be done over the acres contract. And I suppose two last questions. One of them, do REAP participants get priority access into acres? And the answer is no. Participation in REAP will give certain marks in the ranking and selection, but it's not, there's no priority access for REAP participants. And just one more point that I see, or one question that may be important to somebody there. The 1 or 2 advisors have asked if they feel that the stream checker is showing that you know, the wrong stream has been indicated. We've assessed those, and it's highly unlikely. But if you do have concerns about that, again, drop us an email and we'll look at that particular case. That's pretty much it. Thanks, John.
Okay, cheers, Mark. Useful overview there. Yeah, a couple more questions there that are coming in, and you know, I think maybe we're coming to a point now where there's some repetition coming in this. So as I say, we'll try and come back on all the questions in any case. Can a farmer have both arable and grass riparian zone? So there's a 2 hectare limit on both actions. Maybe Pat, you could clarify.
Yeah, the 2 hectare limit is per action, so they're separate actions. So potentially, yes, if a farmer has an arable parcel, they could select riparian buffer zone arable up to 2 hectares, but they would need a forage parcel then, obviously, to be able to select the riparian buffer zone grassland. So they could potentially have 2 hectares in each, but they are distinctly different actions and have different requirements. So just to bear that in mind.
Okay, thanks. Another one, Pat, then is on the low input grassland. I guess people wondering what the specifications of the action are. So they're wondering, can you use multi-species lay in low input grassland? And also, what's the fertilizer limit for low input grassland?
Yeah, first of all, there, as I suppose was elaborated earlier, it's results based. It's not a prescriptive action, so we don't have a limit on fertilizer. But obviously, nitrates regulations set limits for certain crops, and grassland would have fertilizer limits under nitrates. But there is no specific acres fertilizer limit for league. But obviously, if you start to apply a lot of fertilizer, you're likely to get a low score because you won't have the species mix in the sward. Again, multi-species lay, you will not have the species mix that will get you a score if it's a multi-species lay, because it's likely none of those species that are in that mix are in the positive indicators. But it doesn't preclude you from the action. If you're more than 30% perennial ryegrass and more than 3% heather, the parcel is ineligible. But other than that, it's results based, and the scorecard will dictate the payment.
And then, Pat, you mentioned, I suppose, the maximum level of heather that's on low input grassland. There's a slight variation as well for Natura sites, I understand.
Yeah, so I suppose, yeah, where the field is it's a Natura parcel, that 30% ryegrass and 3% heather limits don't apply. But it doesn't mean that the farmer at the parcel will receive a payment. It still has to attain a score of 4 to get the payment of at least $250 a hectare.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Aileen, a question for you. There's a question here. Tree planting on riparian, does it get you tier 2 access? Or I suppose maybe it's just to elaborate the requirements there if you're planting trees on riparian.
Yeah, so like it is one of the under tier 2, one of the options that can potentially, if you choose planting trees in riparian buffer zone, to get tier 2 access. Obviously, you know, there'll be ranking and selection within that. But I did see a question similar in that, you know, can we not plant trees in 2 hectares of a riparian buffer zone and get tier 2? But and why can't we do that? So I've outlined in the presentation that, you know, that it has to fall under the provisions that are within that amendment to the Forestry Act to allow you to plant over the 0.1 of a hectare. So by going over that, then, you know, you just can't do it. So I guess, look, if there were individual, you know, if there were separate areas which you know, with space in between them, that you can plant two 1 hectares area, but you just can't plant over the one hectare. But if you are selecting the planting trees in riparian buffer zone, yeah, it will it will potentially give you access to tier 2, or considered for tier 2.
Okay, thanks, Aileen. And then I guess another one partly related, and it's for access to under tier 1. A farm has natura land. Are they automatically considered tier 1, or do they have to do something to activate that tier 1 status? Again, Aileen or Pat.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So
yeah, it's set out there on the. Oh yeah, Pat, you take one.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, yeah, it doesn't automatically get you tier 1. So the tier structure is there on page 8 of the spec, and it's also included in the terms and conditions. So you have to take one of the actions in the relevant parcel. So if it's a grassland natura parcel, the relevant actions are low input grassland and extensively grazed pasture. And just, I suppose, to emphasize as well, the tree planting in the riparian buffer zones to get tier 2, the minimum number of trees that's required is the minimum for the action, which I think is 10 trees, Aileen, isn't it? So like, you don't have to plant a large amount of trees in a riparian buffer zone to get tier 2. Once you plant the minimum of 10, that'll get you to tier 2 access. Because I suppose it's 2 actions in one. First of all, you have to select a riparian buffer zone, and then you select the planting of trees in a riparian buffer zone. So I suppose that's why we've kept the minimum number of trees low for tier 2 access, because you're really creating 2 actions in one.
Okay, thanks, Pat. I still see lots and lots of questions on the system. So as I say, we will get back to them. It's also pushing 4:30 at this point in time. So I think maybe we've covered enough for the slot. We will get back on it. One of the questions that does appear to be coming up a lot as well is related to when is it opening? When is the closing? Again, we haven't completely nailed down that, but our target is a 6-week period. Again, unfortunately, with I guess the disaster that was there in Creeshla, our plans for this week have been just put on a pause for this week. It is imminent, the availability of the submission button on the system. You know, overall, we're very confident in the system that's there in terms of GLAMs, in terms of how it's all working, in terms of the layers that are visible, how the validations are working to sort of block certain actions and issues like that. So the system should be all operational. It has been available there, I think, since, Mark, is it mid-September? The full functionality was put up for drawing actions.
Yeah, the full, initially GLAM opened in the first week in August, so it was there for information purposes, but it's been there now since the end of, early September, John, yeah. So the full functionality has been there, yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of when we put on that full functionality in early mid-September, any draft plans that were drawn prior to that were removed off the system. So anything that's on the system now, if you as a planner are happy with that plan, once the submit button is made available, you'll be able to press submit and that'll be put in. But once you press submit, no further amendments can take place on the plan. So again, like, the system is there now to, you know, prepare your draft plans in terms of what's on it, to have it ready for that submit button when it's made available. And that should be in the next couple of days, in terms of where we are at this point in time. Mark or Josephine, did you want to add anything further? If not, yeah, go ahead, Josephine.
I think, John, you have covered it there. We are hoping that the submit button will be live in the coming days. So, and I suppose the fact, if advisors have completed a farm sustainability plan, I think the bulk of the work is done. So there's not so much work to be done then once the application button becomes live. Maybe Mark, you want to comment on what's required in terms of the application, and also just to alert advisors that there will be a presentation on the application process. It wasn't here today, but it will go up online with the presentations that were given here today.
Yeah, I think the good news in that is that the application system has been designed to be very user-friendly, very straightforward, and it can be done fairly quickly once the core work of the farm sustainability plan has been done. And I just see another question there. I know we're moving about from questions, but does a farm sustainability plan have to be done for every acres application? And the answer to that is yes. But the application itself, it's simple. And as Josephine said, we'll have our online demonstration within the next couple of days. And it's designed to take you from step one, logging on to GLAM, submitting your plan, and then going into the acres application and seeing it right through to submitting your actual application. So hopefully that'll be of use. And we have a dedicated section on the website. On the acres website, there's a link to a separate page, which will be our support page for advisors. And that's where we will have, we have the GLAM manual, there's Agri-Snap support documents, videos, and other documents that will help in the application process.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So maybe just to finish up then, to thank all the team that are here that have helped to both provide presentations and to respond to the questions. We will revert on the questions that are on the system, that we will have another document to upload to the system. And again, thanks to everyone for listening. We've had just about 500 farm advisors tuned in for today, so it's very impressive in terms of the level of engagement that we're getting off farm advisors at the moment. And again, I guess our sympathies to advisors that are working up in the Donegal region, considering Creasla in terms of the disaster that happened there. So with that, I'll close the session. Thank you.